Welcome to the Launchpad presented by Deloitte. On now, Harvest Academy presented by Bushel Plus. Please welcome Marcel Kringa, CEO and founder of Bushel Plus Limited.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. There's a fan club right there. Thanks, everybody. Oh, this is bright. I can hardly see anyone. Hey, welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out to a session about the Harvest Academy from Bushel Plus. I very much appreciate everybody coming here because I know there's, it's decent weather going on. Everybody's busy on the farm. And I appreciate, people coming to these kind of things and learning, taking it as a learning opportunity while still some stuff's going on the farm. So again, very much appreciated being here while things are busy for you as well. So you see the first slide there. I now have the next 7 hours to kind of walk you through how harvesting works. But in reality, we have an hour and a half together here, and it's a bit of a snippet, okay? We're going to go through who we actually are, why we do what we do, and what a Harvest Academy actually is. I'm going to tell you what the modules are of an academy, and we're also going to do some myth busting together today, because there is a lot of myths out there still about harvesting, about how combines are being run, how things are being taught about how a combine works. And then in the very end, we have some walk-around questions. And part of the myth busting is a bit of new technology that is coming out brand new. And not many people have heard about this yet. So I'm excited to kind of talk about this because it's going to impact every farmer that has a combine going forward. So I'm excited to kind of walk you through this. And then it's kind of a partial part of a Harvest Academy to give you an idea of what we do there. So first off, who is Bushel Plus? Who here has heard of Bushel Plus before? Here we go. Who has heard of the Harvest Academy? Couple of people. That's considerably less. So that's good. So Bushel Plus is a company, and it really started back in the day as a hobby. So my name is Marcel Kringa. I'm the founder and the CEO of the company. Started this about a decade ago, and as you can hear on my accent, that's a bit screwed up. I'm actually originally from Germany, and I've learned your language on a two-way radio running a forage harvester for a few years in Ontario. So that's why I sound a bit odd. So if you have any questions today about what I say, no problem. You can clear that up after the presentation. That's no problem. But my background is really that I'm a farm kid by heart, okay? I grew up on a small mixed farm in the mountains of Germany, so very different than the prairies. You can pretty easy flip a tractor from where I'm from. Actually, one of my buddies flipped the manure spreaders last week. So it's a bit of a different area than the nice prairies where we are today. But I took the opportunity to travel the world and harvest in different countries because the farm at home wasn't big enough to make a living off. We're talking 10 acres, 5 cows, 10 chicken and a goat in the mountains of Germany. So you can't make a living of that. So it gave me the opportunity to go to different countries. So I spent time in Germany, Eastern Europe, spent a couple seasons in Russia about 16 years ago, where we were building farms from 0 to 80,000 acres in about 3 years, and I was setting up John Deere New Holland equipment out there. And I was able to spend some time in Brazil, and since we started Bushel Plus, I spent time in Australia and South Africa as well. So the reason I'm telling you this is because Bushel Plus was started because of some of this experience in those countries. Because it didn't matter where it went, didn't matter the country or the language or the combine, I saw the same thing happening on every farm. We were trying to make combines work, and we were looking on the ground, trying to look for grain loss, and really didn't know how much grain is coming out the back of those machines. And it was kind of a way of things where we needed we needed a better mousetrap. So some of this experience over the years was looking on the ground, then trying to figure out it has to be a better way. Then going to throwing cookie sheets underneath the combine, or running behind with a grain shovel. And you may have seen it on your own farm. And one of my buddies fell once beside the combine. Thankfully, nothing happened, but this was kind of the trigger point where we started thinking about how can we make this better? And that's when we started playing with prototypes on electromagnets and drop pens. But through that whole time, I finished ag university, where I did my apprenticeship in farming, did my diploma, did ag engineering, and wrote my engineering thesis at class about telematics before J.D. Lincoln John Deere Ops Center even came out. So after university, had the chance to come to Canada, work for a custom harvesting operation in Ontario, tried to learn English on a two-way radio, came out west, became the Cargill agronomist in Manitoba, in Brandon actually. And that's when it really hit me, because I was exposed to the input cost, chemicals, paying the agronomist for this, worrying about the weather. It was really more farm-focused, where before it was lots of harvesting and custom stuff for me. Now I was exposed to also the emotions that are tied to this, right? There's a lot of money that goes into the crop, putting it in the springtime, and there's a lot of emotions about, is the crop going to make it, what kind of hailstorm is coming. So Cargill then basically said, well, this Marcel has to manage the Red River Valley. So I moved to the Red River Valley, got more exposure, helping people setting combines, was the only agronomist that didn't go on vacation in the summertime, and then figured out, sometimes there's 4 or 5 bushel grain loss coming out the back of these machines when we were measuring. And it was also the time where pod shatter canola came out. Some of you all may remember that all of a sudden we looked at the threshing from swath canola, super dry, to pod shatter, green canola. So it was very different, and things were changing in the industry a little bit about how we had to thresh the crop. So all of this led to a hobby out of my basement, growing into a real company, which is now called Bushel Plus. And our vision at Bushel Plus is to increase global fruit production by dramatically reducing harvest loss. Bushel Plus was never started just to sell another product or market another thing. It was started as a hobby with a passion to help farmers get more grain in the bin. And we will continue to drive that vision, and that's what everybody in the team at Bushel Plus is passionate about. That's why we get up every morning. That's the exciting part about it. So our mission is really to bring innovation to the farmers, not just with products and technology, but also with information and education. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And all of this combined positions us really as the harvest optimization company that became a leader in harvest optimization, not around the products, but also around how people talk about harvest and how the education around it works. And the only way we deliver this is through continuous innovation. These are our brand pillars, how we want to do business at Bushel Plus. We want to deliver continuous innovation to drive farmer success. And farmer success, you probably hear me talking about this a lot today, is very important for us. Again, we're farm kids by heart. And if the farmer doesn't win, we do not do business. I will tell this every dealer around the world that we want to partner up with. I said, first thing that has to happen is the farmer has to win. If the farmer wins, the dealer wins, and we win, we can do business all day long. But if that doesn't happen, we're not talking. So it's super important for me to keep that culture going as the company grows. And obviously, we need technical excellence to deliver quality experiences so that our farmers, customers, and dealers know that they can count on us, and we're only a text away or a phone call. A little bit of history here before we get into the weeds. I was saying I'm doing this for about a decade now, and in 2022, we acquired a company called Mad Concaves that all of you may know, out of Brandon, Manitoba area, founded by Murray, Al, and Dallas, first letters M-A-D, Mad Concaves. I have a huge respect for the guys. They built a tremendous business. So that was about 18 years ago when they started, and they were kind of getting into that age where they wanted to retire. And they kept kind of jokingly saying, hey, Marcel, you're a young bugger. You should buy us out. You should take this over. And thankfully, then in 2022, we were able to make that work. What's more important for today's presentation is we also acquired a company in Germany called Agrartraining, or Ag Training in German, in English, Ag Training. And that company has done close to 20 years of combine clinics and training all over Europe. And the person that started that is out of those days where Helmut Klaas, if you ever heard of Helmut Klaas before, they were sitting together with Helmut Klaas on a Friday evening having a beer yet, discussing what kind of stuff they should build next. So a person has a lot of experience, and we were able to take that business over and continue it with that person in the background still. So lots of cool input in the background. And what we've done then with the knowledge we already have from other countries, from Germany and Canada, we have launched the Harvest Academy, which we're going to talk about today, which is really our educational department of the company. And then we have an international team. I'm really proud of everyone that works at Bushel Plus because they work hard and they care. So for example, we have product specialists, we have Red Seal John Deere mechanic on staff, we have a C&H engineer on staff who used to work on the product combine line in the US. So it's really cool working with the team that we have. And then our sales span is about exporting products into 35 different countries. And that's kind of cool because of a couple things. Everything is Canadian made. And I think in these important times, it's important that we say this too. It's made in Canada. You know, we buy North American steel. We still support our friends in the US 100%, but it's built in the prairies. You know, we're creating jobs, and we're doing great things there. But also, I have to say thank you and a big appreciation for everybody that supported us in the beginning and still does it now. We wouldn't be here today if people in the beginning wouldn't have supported us and would have trusted us coming to a farm show, you know, having a sample there, giving us a check in November, and then getting it shipped in July, August. So thank you very much. If you were one of the early supporters, it's much appreciated, and we'll never forget where we came from there as a company as we grow. A couple things about our products before we get into the Harvest Academy, because it's important to say that the Harvest Academy is not a sales pitch. Obviously, we have our products there to kind of walk through some stuff. Sometimes we have a green combine, sometimes we have a yellow one, sometimes we have another color. But at the end of the day, it's about laying the groundwork, talking about what's important, and then figuring out how the combine actually works front to back. As Bushel Plus, you may know us as the drop pan company, or it used to be the Bushel Plus system. Now we brand it as the Smart Pan system because the system evolved and the software is getting bigger. We also have a little mini combine. It's up front here, so you don't have to take that big combine to the field to take a sample of grain to check the moisture, see if the field's ready to harvest. You can leave the combine at home, and you send your grandma or your kids with that mini combine, and all of a sudden you know what that field is testing for moisture. And then obviously I just talked about the mat concaves, which the cool thing about that is, you know, if you ever change concaves on an S-Series machine with two people, easily takes you a couple hours to do that. And with the mat concave split frame system in different machines on the New Holland John Deere, one person, 15 minutes, ready for another crop to put that to good use. A little bit of a pitch about that. Educational department, the Harvest Academy. That's where the rubber hits the road when we talk about innovation and talk about a couple things. So this is training, okay? This is not us preaching, saying, here's how you have to do it. It's black and white, and Bushel Plus knows it all. That's not how we do this. Harvest Academy is actually very open back and forth. It's a very open session. So I'm going to get into details later, but it's also not about bashing the OEM or bashing a dealer. We're actually doing this in combination with dealers, where we're taking a part of the combine clinic and explaining it, and then they're taking a part of specific monitors or specific GPS things that is more their brand in this. We've had lots of great relationships there. It's really taken off in the US right now with this as well. And it's really something where people came up afterwards and said, you know what, all of a sudden the dots are connected. I know I'm not better now when I'm sitting in the cab. What do I have to do when X happens, or X, Y, Z? So that's what that's for, really. Now, I do like to ask a lot of questions, so when we do these things, as I just said, what combines do we run here in the audience here, if I can see you with the lights? Who's running S-Series or STS Series machines? There we go. Who's running X9s? Also a few. Who's running Case? Right on. New Holland? Right on. Class? Fendt? Right on. Gleaner? Right on. Right on. And somebody built their own combine yet? No. Somebody bought an X set? Not yet. Okay, we're working with those guys as well. Interesting. Who's swathing their canola versus straight cutting? Or a part of it? There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just asking because it's kind of interesting for harvesting. It's a little bit different conditions. So, okay. Right on. Gives us a bit of an idea of what we're talking about and who we have here, because here's often what we hear. Some of the myths out there, okay? So Oftentimes we don't need a pan for cereals or pulses. You can just set the combine. You don't need anything. The combine just goes. You can see the kernels on the ground. No big deal. It's easy. My one concave can do all crops. There's no worries there. And the best one yet is the combine self-adjusts. I have automation. That's, just push the button and you go. Week's good, keep trucking. But what you really see in the field, once you get out there, it's an eye-opening experience. Once you actually start dropping some pans, and you start finding smaller broken kernels, which are also grain loss, right? Or you all of a sudden start running into threshing challenges for different varieties or conditions. One of the things we've seen in the short time that Bushel Plus exists, about a decade, is varieties have changed already. And some of the conditions in the last couple of years have been really tricky. So when you get out into the field, things can look a bit different. And then the other thing is, loss sensors are only useful when they are properly calibrated. And you're going to hear me talking about this a lot today, about the loss sensor, because that's one of those things that is really important. And part of the Harvest Academy is, you have to imagine it this way. A lot of the things we talk about in training is things we can do before harvest. So we're not talking about things to slow down your harvest. The last thing we want to do is slow down your harvest or have you go on less acres per hour. We want to help you speed up harvest and be more efficient. So a lot of the things we talk about is things you can do before the dust is flying. Because if your combine is ready for harvest and you understand what has to get done prior, before the rubber hits the road or before the dust flies, it will change your entire harvest experience that way. And then we sometimes see things like this in the field. And it doesn't matter the color. Don't pay too attention to the colors in my example pictures here, because really the color doesn't matter in some of those examples. So how was the last season in terms of hard threshing conditions here? Saskatchewan. Was it a bit rougher? Cereals were baked in? Okay, I got to start throwing hats so more people start talking. Make sure you pick up your hat afterwards. There you go. It was really baked in, right? It was tough. It was dry. Tough to get the small kernels out. And that happens, and it'll continue to happen. And then sometimes we see this. Who's ever seen that before? Maybe not that many, but a few, right? We have a few smiles here. People have used a cover plate here or there. So I have to be really careful now not to get carried away, because I can talk about a cover plate for an hour and what it does in the combine and how it works. But I'm just showing you some examples of what we've seen in the field and the experience that we bring back into the training. I know we see things like this. Some companies, there's aftermarkets out there, but there's also OEM setups, build round bars or make the round bar wider in between, and then still putting either cover plates in or these kind of inserts that now make the opening smaller. And then again, depending on conditions, you don't have much room to go. And sometimes you see those plugged up things. So you see something like this here, specifically in large wire concaves or round bars and really wet corn. This was an interesting experience. You see in the front here an O-grade concave from us that we tried out. And it was about 32% wet, high moisture corn. Okay? So really wet stuff. And as you can see, the plugging is different. The O-grade isn't plugging there, but the back combine is plugging. And it happens a lot with round bar concaves and large wires, because the leaves are kind of hairpinning in that. And all of a sudden you have less capacity, and the free grain that you just threshed out earlier can't go anywhere. The interesting thing here is, when I'm bringing this up, the farmer actually then ended up putting in a round bar in the second position because they wanted to have more spindles in the sample. So they were doing high moisture corn for dairy, and dairy likes fiber. So they were putting that through a mill, and they needed more cob, more spindle in it. So they put a round bar in so that sample was on purpose getting dirtier, because with 2 O-grades in there, it was clean. So some of those things we bring back. And then a couple other things. I always like to put a little bit of humor in it. There's a bit of global experience from us as well. Our team has seen lots of interesting things. I hope you've never seen this thing in your field ever before. Bit of a tree stump. If you hit that with 3 miles an hour, with the brand new 35-foot flex head. And the air seeder driver obviously didn't tell you about that when they were cleaning up a bush around the corner. And then you maybe see something like this. That was my time in Russia. We had 4 brand new 35-foot headers, and every header found 2 tree stumps in the same year. First harvest cleaning up fields. So why I'm showing this to you is it shows you a little bit about the experience that some of us in the team have. Because if you try to configure that header back together with hardly any spare parts in that area of the world, you wouldn't believe how many hours I have spent with a water bottle just drizzling water on the knives, on the guards to see if it's still hot, because you had to put this all back together. So we can learn from all these things, and we bring some of this stuff obviously back in the training, as I said now multiple times. We were farming an interesting area. We put a lot of weird stuff through the combine. Wasn't always easy. We were farming in an area by the Ukrainian border, and that's the area where there was one of the largest tank battles in the Second World War. So it wasn't uncommon to actually find a part of an old tank or some tracks and things like that. So interesting area. And when you combine that experience and then look at the research, so it's not just Marcel from Bushel Plus or somebody else from Bushel Plus talking about grain loss. You look at the global stats and some of the research that's out there. There's GRDC that you may have heard of. It's an Australian grower association. And they figured out that estimated $98 million of canola is lost out of the back of a combine every year in one state, only in Western Australia. Manitoba, a little bit closer to home. Rob Golden did a great study about 3 years of the same fields, figured out that 2 to 11% of grain loss from total combine loss that does exist out there. Precision Planting has done research on it, on corn and beans, actually with our system here, and they've done a pile of stuff on header loss and harvest loss, and still found out that you can't see all the grain on the ground. You can't see all the kernels on the ground, even if it's corn or even if it's soybeans. And then PAMI research, I always like to bring up some PAMI stuff because it's them talking, not me talking. Over the years, they've commonly seen 2 to 5 bushel per acre grain loss in canola. And here's the trouble thing. It doesn't look like a whole lot when it's on the ground. 4 bushel on the ground doesn't look like a whole lot. And here's what we got to remember. All these things have one thing in common, okay? We can only manage what we can measure. Comes back to this simple sentence. If we don't measure, we can't manage it. And it doesn't matter what kind of equipment you may have. If you pull your combine with 3 horses, like this fella from 1950, who does have a drop pen, by the way, and our neighbor from Russia, or if you have the brand new X9 up there. It doesn't matter. You have to verify what's coming out the back of the machine to see what's on the loss display. And we're going to get into this in the next couple of slides. Now, how many pounds per acre are we seeding when we want to have a decent canola crop? What are we putting down for that? Roughly. 5. 4? 5, 4. We'll do a couple hats for 5 and 4. So now, 4 to 5 pounds of canola per acre we're putting down to seed a really nice canola crop, right? So at harvest, we're targeting 1 bushel per acre grain loss max at canola. Now that sounds great when we say that, and trust me, I know that's not always perfect. It's not always a great day. It's not always good harvesting conditions. There's snow in Canada. We got to get going. We got to push. But that's kind of our target. And I want to rip that target apart a little bit because when you think about it, a bushel of canola, how many pounds of canola are in a bushel? 50. There you go, 50. We'll go with 50. 50 pounds a bushel. Lost target is a bushel, 50 pounds an acre. So our targeted harvest is to throw 10 times more seed in the field than when we were seeding to get a 35, 60 bushel crop. I just want to put that in relation because we always talk so easy about, oh, it's a bushel per acre grain loss. But when you put it in relation, it's a lot of seed. And I understand that's tricky. But then think about 2 bushel, 3, 4 bushel per acre on grain loss, of how much that actually becomes in the ground when it rains, when you work it, and then you have the whole follow-up effect on. It's not just the grain that you're losing in the moment, it's also the management on the farm now, because we have more regrowth. We're dealing with volunteer crops next year. We have farmers coming back to us after using our smart pen system for a few years, and they're saying, you know what, we're dealing with less volunteer pressure now because we know our combine better, we know what we're doing, and it really helps us now managing our entire farm better. So the reason why I say this is, it seems like taking time when the combine stops at harvest. When the combine stands for a minute, how does it feel in here? Feels like 3 hours, right? So I know how that is, but a few minutes at harvest to take care of some of this stuff can turn into a really, really big ROI for you going forward. So why did we decide to offer combine clinics under the Harvest Academy brand? The machines are getting more complex. There's a lot of things to know. You guys have, sorry, when I say you guys, it's ladies and gentlemen, okay? That's just how they taught me English, and it kind of stuck in my brain, just so we're all clear there. Complex machines, they're getting trickier. GPS, you got to know your sprayer, you got to know your tractor, you got to know marketing, you got to know so many different things. You pay the accountant, you pay the agronomist. You got a lot of stuff on the go, right? And stuff is complex, and we're sitting on this machine for 2 months out of the year, if that. We work with some custom harvesters. They're starting now in May in Texas, and they're going to combine till December, and we work lots with those guys, but that's a bit different. So it's complex. So the farmer feedback was, hey, would you guys ever offer more clinics on these type of things? And, I bought the smart pen. Now I know my losses, but what do I do next? So it's really a collaborative approach of taking that feedback and saying, okay, let's figure out how we can do this without taking away from dealers' combine clinics. And then also changing crops and markets. I talked about the pod shatter canola already. Different markets, there's different crops coming in and different qualities, different weather patterns. And then also a neutral offering. I said earlier, we have clinics, sometimes we have all the colors of combines there, and sometimes we have a couple of colors there, but it doesn't mean that somebody can't be there and asking questions about a different machine. As we just saw, there's lots of different machines out there. And that really led to bringing the Harvest Academy to life here. So what is that? It's a one-of-a-kind training, really, what it is. So it's an educational platform, not just for farmers. We've done it for agronomists, seed companies, dealers. We've done it, or plan to do some training for lab technicians, so they understand more about what's going on in the industry when they look at seed quality and when they look at seed in the lab. It's really something to connect the world more and make it everybody understanding more what's going on at harvest. And then it's hands-on. I condensed a lot of it today in a bit of a PowerPoint. Usually the setting is on the combine, ripping the combine apart, starting at the header and going all the way through. And afterwards, we can still do that. I'm happy to stick around here and answer questions, particularly to a few things. We have a combine here. I ripped the shields off on the side so we can also look inside. And it's experts. And we have one person in Germany, that's our importer. He's done years and years of training for John Deere and Claas, specifically dealer training. That was his responsibility, and now he's our importer in Germany. And as I mentioned, we have our couple agronomists here in the team as well. We talked already a little bit about why it matters, and there's another research there from the University of Georgia talking about kind of similar things. And this is what it looks like. So we have 6 different modules, and if we do an entire session, we say 4 to 5 hours. Can also be 6 hours sometimes, depending on the questions and what's all going on. Usually there's a lot of engagement, a lot of fun, some banter there, obviously, between different colors. So we're trying to keep it positive and funny in a way. And then we have the module with the header. We're going through the threshing system, the cleaning system, and connecting the dots of what is connected with each other. And then some of the machine calibration that you got to do before you get going. And then obviously also different crop types and the influences. And that's usually where a lot of discussion happens back and forth because it's so different on every farm. I talked earlier about the different countries, but it's already different from area province 1 to area province 2, or even inside the province. Today, we're going to focus on the module number 6, which is called the invisible loss and grain quality. You may be going to say, man, Marcel, you talked enough about loss. Now you're going to tell me about invisible loss yet? How much more loss can there be? But this is something that gets overseen quite a bit and is something that's good to talk about, to kind of bring to the forefront. Okay? So it's the harvest loss versus broken grain, the expectations versus the reality. And here's the perception of grain loss. At that stage, it might be too late. And you're thinking to yourself, well, it's pretty trivial to say, Marcel, I didn't come here for you to tell me it's too late when the fields are green. But you wouldn't believe how many people still use that as one of their main decision makers of how grain loss worked at harvest. Again, not knocking anybody, but it's still out there. So we want to talk about it. How can we turn this into a positive? Everything we talk about, we want to turn into a positive. It's not about blame or pointing fingers. Everything we do, we want to turn into something positive. So by the time the fields are getting green, it's too late. But then these pictures are only telling you half the truth because of the broken kernels. That would basically be your invisible loss. There's only one positive thing about broken kernels. What is it? Pardon me? The rotor, that's why it maybe happens with broken grain, but I heard it here. What's the good thing about broken kernels? It won't germinate, exactly. There you go. I'll just throw this to you. There you go. Good catch. Thank you. So it doesn't germinate, so your neighbor doesn't laugh at you, right? Because I can tell you that it doesn't matter which country you're in, doesn't matter which language you speak, doesn't matter what combine you drive. In every country, when the fields are getting green, neighbors start talking. Doesn't matter which country you're in or which area. That's just a thing, okay? It's the only positive thing about broken grain. The trouble is with broken grain is it's still grain loss for you. And you have a hard time. I'm going to get into the details why we have a hard time with this here. Good old grandpa or grandma rule, 3 kernels under the palm of my hand is just fine for grain loss. Okay, well, what hand? My hand? Carl's hand? Your hand? What kind of header? 25-foot header? 35? We're now talking 50-foot headers, and we have customers in Australia talking bigger than 50-foot headers now. So the measuring of this, of an expensive combine that's really a precision farming tool, is tough. And then the other thing is, when you look on the ground, you don't really know if it's coming from the header, or if it's coming from the combine, or if it's pre-harvest loss, if it was there before. I've had some people telling me, well, that's simple. The stuff that is pushed in by the tires in the dirt, that's all header loss because the combine drove over it. And everything that's not pushed in by the tires is just combine loss, super easy. Right. That can work for a little bit if you have really big soybeans, maybe this big, But really, when you look at broken kernels and you want to get your entire grain loss total, that's a tricky thing to do. It's just not accurate enough. And then part of that broken grain is somewhere else. So you have to remember, now you have broken grain in your hopper, you have broken grain in your drop pan. Where's the rest of that broken kernel? It's most likely flour, or it's out of the combine somewhere else. So it is an actual grain loss that we're kind of ignoring most of the time. And here's why that becomes more and more important, okay? We have higher yields and larger grains will have shorter varieties with short straw, and then we're able now to use growth regulators in Canada, last time I checked at least, similar to Europe, where now you can regulate the growth and you have less straw, shorter varieties. And then you have multi-drum threshing units where it's a lot more aggressive inside the combine, or a wore-out feeder chain. There can be a lot of different things that impact that we don't have the time for today. But a lot of that now impacts it because you're dealing with less straw, more grain in the combine, and we have more horsepower to drive more RPM, or somebody has something that is wore out in the machine and all of a sudden wears very differently. And every time you hit a grain kernel, it breaks into multiple pieces and it's basically lost. So the broken grain, it obviously reduces germination when you're producing seed, but it also impacts storage. It cakes up in augers or in bins. It reduces grain quality in general, and it's a loss of grain. So we've talked about that. We go through different combine types in the very beginning of an academy. I just put them in here for reference. There's still a little bit of confusion about what is what. For example, the hybrid threshing system like the Lexion, it is not a rotor combine. The Lexion does thresh with the conventional threshing drum up front, and the rotors are the separating area. But I like to lay the groundwork at the Harvest Academy so that everybody's on the same page. I don't like to assume. I came to this country and I had to ask a lot of questions to learn the language and understand different things. And you can't be shy about that. So in a Harvest Academy, I don't want people to sit there and think, what the heck is Marcel talking about? What is that exactly? So the Academy starts figuring out terminology and figuring out what are we talking about, what actually is a return. And again, we got a lot of feedback from people that are also new into harvesting or younger people taking over the farm that said, hey, really informative, worked really well. I could actually follow along. Nobody was talking over my head. I was able to understand it. And we had people that did 20 years of custom harvesting in Georgia and Texas. They came up to us after and said, we've never done a clinic like this. This was cool. We really learned something. And if not, they've done 20 years of custom combining in the US. So I'd like to point that out because it's important that everybody's on the same page when we're doing these types of trainings. Here's one of those examples from the field where we had a farmer looking on the ground. This example is in Germany. And we found about 0.6% grain loss on entire kernels. And then when you look at how many broken kernels you have there, in addition to the full kernels, now all of a sudden our grain loss is going to 1.6% grain loss. Now to put one on top, technically what you have to do to be accurate on broken grain is you got to weigh it separately and times that by 2. Because you most likely only have half of the broken stuff there. So you weigh it, times it by 2. I can see some people going, well, it's way too much time to do all of this stuff. But I want you to remember that once you start doing it, it's just like anything else. Once you start doing it, you start learning it, and you get better at it as you do. You learn more about the combine. You know the settings. If you have our system, don't want to assume. There's other ones out there, of course. If you have our system, there is a Smart Drop app with that, where you can put your combine settings in. So then you can track of what worked well this week. And if you run into similar conditions next week or next year, you can go back and have that benchmark already. You have a starting point with it. So you're going to get better at this as you're figuring this out. Okay, and also, that if you are checking with the chopper on, remember that chopper destroys some of the grain as well. So you got to be careful with that. And that brings me to the next myth here, or maybe the question of the question. Should I be checking harvest loss by dropping straw in the windrow, or should I do it while I'm spreading my straw and chaff? And that seems to be the question that splits the world in half, specifically in North America, or actually in Canada, I got to say. It's an interesting thing in Canada, because so we work with the OEMs. Every OEM actually has our Smart Pen system in the R&D department, their marketing department, in their demo team. And most of what they have is the 40-inch system. I don't know if you know that. We have a couple different sizes. We have a 20-inch system between sunflower stalks or corn stalks. Falls nicely in between the 30-inch row. We have a 40-inch system you see up here. It's kind of our flagship standard. And then we have a 60-inch wide system because some people like to drop the straw and chaff in the windrow and at the same time want to check the entire width of the combine of the sieve. And that's totally fine. That's why we built a 60-inch. And we actually can do 80-inch by now because we can easily put two 40 inches beside each other and we're covering any kind of combine that is on the market super easy. But when you look at the OEMs and the engineers and the test people, most of what they use in the field is 40-inch systems. So if the engineer in Germany or the engineer in the US builds and sets up a combine with a 40-inch system, we should be able to do it in the field as well. However, it's totally farmer preference. We're not preaching to do it one way or the other. But I want you to have one takeaway on this. If you ask me, Marcel, how should we be doing it? Here's our answer to this. And it's been in our user manual since I started Bushel Plus. It's written right in it. It says, start by dropping your chaff and straw in a windrow to make sure all your heads and your pods are threshed out properly. Because that's the only way to see if you have unthreshed heads or pods coming out of the concave, out of the rotor, and comes out of the back of the machine. If you have those conditions and you're not threshing in the front and your chopper is engaged, guess what? The chopper is destroying the evidence for the most part. The chopper is destroying these unthreshed heads or pods from the front, and all of a sudden you check your grain loss behind the chopper and you see a lot of grain. But you may think it's coming from somewhere else. Meanwhile, it's the unthreshed parts that the combine is not doing in the front. So, I'll repeat this. We'll drop the straw and chaff in the windrow when we start. You can drop the pan just to get a bit of an idea. But the main thing you got to look at is in the straw. Are the heads cleaned out? Are the pods open? And how long is your straw? Look at your straw. You want your straw as long as possible coming through a combine because it's a lot easier to get that separated further on. If you have too aggressive concaves, if you have too aggressive of a threshing RPM, too concave, too tight, or cover plates in it, that's what I'm actually meant to say with aggressive concaves. You have a cover plate in it and stuff can't thresh because it has to go around another time and it can't fall through, then what you create is a lot of short straw. So you got to look at that in the moment. Once you're happy with that and you have your concave set the way you want it, then put it back into chopping mode and check the way you harvest. Because when you engage the chopper, some combines are worse than others, but when you engage the chopper, you change the wind physics in the back of the machine, and now you have a different loss distribution throughout the combine into your chopper or into the chaff spinners, okay? So dropping straw and chaff in the windrow, usually I do that when we start a new crop, when we start a new variety a couple times, and then go back into spread mode, drop the pan a couple of times, middle and left, and we're ready to rock and roll. Sounds like a long process, but it comes back to you do this a few times, you properly calibrate your concaves, you know where to set it at, you take notes down, and next year it's just going to come automatically of how you do it. It's all about not just doing it in the moment and being happy in the moment, it's all about learning it here for the long term, okay? That's really what this is about. The reason why we want to check on the sides of the machine, because sometimes you have chaff spreaders and the loss is only distributed to the sides of the machine. That's always very tricky. I've seen people do that. They throw a pan in the middle of the machine. Meanwhile, the chaff spreaders are chucking everything to the outsides. So there's no sieve loss measured in the middle where the pan was just landing. So you just have to think about this a little bit as you're measuring there for your machine. So now, why? I got to look this way. Why is it important? I think we're on the same page now. I've talked about it a lot. But a couple examples here. You know, again, you put an expensive crop in, you buy the best seed, you buy the best fertilizer, you do all the hard work, you want to get it in the bin. And Grandpa once said, you can reseed, you can respray, you can only harvest once. That kind of became our slogan at Bushel Plus. You can only harvest at once. And when we got to calibrate those sensors, it will be a complete different machine afterwards. Now, who here has an air seeder? Or planter, air seeder or planter? Right on. So when you guys go from wheat to barley, do you recalibrate it? Yes? Canola to wheat? Yes? So how do we do that? It's really hard to see you all. So I'm just going to ask questions in the dark. How do you do that? You're probably looking at a screen, press the button and run the calibration, eh? Or you're looking at the tank and you're cranking the handle to run the calibration and run the revolutions, okay? That's how we're doing it, right? And then we're looking under the tank and we're seeing all this nice seed and the fertilizer running out of the cart on the gravel, and then we're looking at this big pile, right? And we stand in the yard and we go, nah, that's good enough, let's go seed, that's 50 pounds, let's go. Is that how we do it? Who's the first person to say no? No, we're not doing that, right? What are we doing? We're weighing it, right? You have a bucket and a scale. Every air seeder, every planter comes with a bucket and a scale. Why? Because you want to make sure you're not putting too much seed into the ground, because seed is expensive. You only want to seed once. So harvest starts with seeding. Why don't we take this approach to harvest? Because what happens at harvest for the most part? We're looking behind the combine. That's good enough. Let's go drive. Who's guilty of that? I am. I've done that a long time in my life before. So I'm trying to get everybody to think a little bit different, right? Happens too often at harvest. I'm looking on the ground and go, that's good enough, let's go seed. But if we take that approach to harvesting and figure out how to calibrate a combine properly, that we actually need a bucket and a scale for the combine, then that is something that will change the way you harvest. Bit of an idea here about grain loss sensors. Okay, want to explain a little bit how they work and what throws us off often. First thing, make sure they're clean. You see that little picture in the corner? We want to make sure they're clean. Happens all too often that they're actually not clean, and then it can't show you anything. We're going to talk a little bit about a sensor in canola, and I'm going to give you a bit of a sneak peek into a different module of the Academy. And I'm going to explain the sensor here in a bit. The sensor, to keep it simple, is essentially a contact plate behind the machine. Let's talk about the sieve sensor for a second, okay? So the sensor sitting behind the sieve, and the kernels are hitting the sensor. As the kernels are coming off the sieve and falling out the combine, that's the grain loss. And as they're falling out of the sieve, they're supposed to hit the sensor, okay? And the more grain hits the sensor, the higher the display in the cab is supposed to go, okay? Same counts for the opposite. The less grain is hitting the sensor, the lower the display is supposed to be in the cab. That would be pretty awesome. However, what the manufacturers did is they put a sensitivity setting in between. So now that you, as the operator, can go in, and when a lot of grain loss hits the sensor, you can just go in and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to turn the sensitivity down. And now my display is coming down and not displaying the actual grain loss that's coming out the back of the combine. Or it's the opposite, where very little grain is hitting the sensor, but your sensitivity is all the way up. And all of a sudden, your loss display is way too high in the cab when you look at that. What's the first thing we do when the loss sensor goes up? Slow down, right? Pull the stick back. First thing everybody does. Why? You think we're overloading the machine, too much material in, and we have grain loss out the back now. But do we really know what's going on? Do we know the loss is going from 1 bushel to 3, or does it go from 4 to 5? Do we really know that? And I forgot to ask a question earlier, I think. Who here does take the time to calibrate the loss sensor? A little bit? Definite yes, maybes, yes. That's the normal answer we get. Doesn't matter in which 35 countries we ask. It's kind of the normal rate of replies that we get. So they put the sensitivity in there that you can adjust to tell what's coming off the sensor. It's tricky to do this because you as a human, you're looking at a display that goes up or down, right? Now, how does automation work? Does automation make it better? No. Automation does the same thing as you as a human does. The automation looks at the display in the background and looks at it and goes, whoa, the display is too high. I have too much grain loss. I'm going to slow this machine down. Or I'm going to do something different. If the losses are low, the machine might take off on you or do something different with the sieves or with the rotor speed because it's thinking there is no grain loss. So it's kind of bad data in, bad data out. And having that sensor not calibrated, the best way to explain this is if you have it's like having a measure tape without numbers or without lines on it. Okay, and you try to do carpentry. You might be on a couple edges, but for the most part, you'll be off, building whatever you're building. And calibrating the sensor is like putting numbers and lines back on the measure tape so that you know what's going on. And the way we've done this in the past, I say past because I'm going to talk about a couple other things here, is the following. So if you have a Case New Holland machine or a Lexion, then you have a sensitivity on there, and you're usually looking at a green-orange bar, right? Kind of green-orange-red on your in your cab. On a John Deere, you see this on the display here. You have they call it a performance monitor, where the bars go up or down. And here's what we do to calibrate a sensor. We have a drop pan on the combine, and then just before we drop the pan, we put the sensitivity of the grain loss display into the high green, let's say. If you don't have colors, put it a third way up. On a John Deere, you have to press a button in the cab. It's called set to current. And what happens on the display is it goes right up the middle. All the bars go right in the middle. And it's scary when you do it for the first time because you think it's all the grain's going out the back. But all it does is it takes this one point-in-time measurement and realizes what's hitting the sensor, and now it's showing what's on the sensor halfway up, or high green in the Case New Holland, okay? Now you go out the back of the combine, or the grain car driver picks it up, whichever way you want to do it, and you check the drop pan. Now imagine there's 1 bushel per acre grain loss in the pan. That means that the high green, or the middle of that sensor, is now a bushel per acre out the back, roughly, okay? So what you just did, you benchmarked the display to what's actually coming out the back. If it was showing you 4 bushel per acre grain loss, now you go into changing settings, trying to get the display down a little bit, and you repeat it. You drop the pan again, you hit the button again, and basically bring it back to alignment, okay? Some of the newer machines that have automation now have a sensitivity or / they call the cal number. So it's kind of a reference number that you can play with, which is very similar to the sensitivity, okay? That's how a sensor is supposed to work. But if we ignore it, or we don't do anything with it, it really doesn't help us. And then we bought a $500,000 or maybe $1 million combine these days, and we're not utilizing it to the full potential with that. The other thing that it does that farmers are actually telling us is it gives them peace of mind. You're sitting in the cab, you can look at the display, you check what's coming out the back, you can enjoy harvest until something else breaks and you hear it on the two-way radio. But you know what I mean. It gives you the peace of mind that you know what you're doing, you know what the machine is doing, and you can harvest your grain that way. I said I'm going to give you a sneak peek into a different module. This is kind of our threshing loss module, where we talk about short straw versus long straw in the machine. Which do you think is easier to get the grain out of a lot of short straw or out of a lot of long straw in the machine? What did I say earlier? Long. I heard a couple longs here. I'm gonna leave that here. I'm not gonna throw it this time, okay? Make sure you grab that. So long straw. We want long straw out of it, because what happens with short straw in a machine, and I go through it really quickly, is, for example, if you have cover plates in there, or if you're creating a lot of short straw and you have free grain stuck in the short straw, it's really hard to get the kernels out of the rotor. And then the kernels may not hit the grain loss sensor in the moment. So now it's almost backwards from what I said earlier, where I said we have to check what's coming out the back and see what the grain loss monitor is showing us. The trickiest condition for this phenomena is canola. Canola is your trickiest crop where you do that with when it comes to the short straw thing. And that's why it's so important to drop your straw and chaff in the windrow in the beginning, okay? Because you don't want to shred that straw and can't get the grain out of there. Let's talk a bit about combine automation. It's definitely up and coming. You won't get around it. If you are investing into a new combine, there might be a couple options yet where you don't have it on it. But the reality is, most of the new combines are going to get rolled out with it, maybe even standard in the future. Okay? And I talked already about it, that the automation does need a proper CALT loss sensor and a proper loss display. And it's not just me babbling that. The best testimonial I can give you is actually from CNH. I did training with the Case corporate specialists in Texas a few years ago because I bought a bunch of smart pen systems for their demo tour. And I spent time with them to talk about how to drop the pans, how to look for grain loss, and how to do it on the sensors, and how to work with the automation. It was really cool. And we both learned lots. And then when I was done, somebody stood up and said, yeah, hi, I'm actually the software engineer in the factory from Case, and I write the software code for the loss display, and I write the software code for the automation. And my brain went, uh-oh, now I'm in trouble. Because I just told those guys for 3 hours that it doesn't work. And it really doesn't work. And it's not just Case, it's just in general. Let me just make this clear, any kind of color. But the person stood up. I thought I'm in trouble. And then the person continued and said, what Marcel just told you for the last 3 hours is exactly what I've been telling you for years. If you don't calibrate the loss sensor, I might as well stay at home and don't even write the code. I might as well not even come to work. So that's a huge testimonial to us and to the fact that it needs a calibration for the automation to work. Because if you remember the marketing a few years ago, the marketing was pretty simple. Push go and start driving, right? That was kind of the standard marketing. The marketing has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, and I'm not sure how much credit we can take for it, but there's certainly some credit in the marketplace as we push harvest optimization out there, because now the next generation of combines has something that is making this one step smoother. And I'm going to show you a couple examples, and I'm going to start with Claas. And I'm going to start with them because they were the first ones out there. And this is a corporate video from the product specialist from Claas in Australia from last season, where they're starting the calibration. So instead of putting in a sensitivity and drop the pan, as I just explained it, they start an automated calibration. They drop the pan, they do the same process, they put it in the air separator, and then they weigh it. Weight is important here. If anybody tells you that you can measure harvest loss with 1,000 kernel weight or volume, You don't want to do that because your 1,000 kernel weight changes with every crop, every variety, every field. Every farmer buys canola seed with 1,000 kernel weight by now on the bag, okay? So the weight is important for two reasons. A, you got to be accurate because volume is not accurate, ain't working. It's rough. It can give you in a direction, okay? Again, it can get you in a direction, but it's not giving you the exact bushel per acre grain loss. Second piece is these new combines, they're asking you for a bushel per acre grain loss result. So now the combine doesn't need you to put sensitivity in it anymore. The combine needs you to put in bushel per acre. So all of a sudden, our smart pen system became an essential tool for the combine, just like the bucket and the scale that I've been talking about for half my life now. So they started doing that. It's rolled out, it's active for 2 years. A lot of people don't know about it yet. Some dealers don't know about it yet, but it's in the machine and it's coming. And then also, I mean, the darker green is not far behind. They've tested the prototypes last summer, and they just released a YouTube video, or I should say another YouTube video with our system in the official John Deere corporate video that shows how to calibrate that loss sensor for the automation. They don't call it quite sensor calibration, they call it harvest settings automation. And what it is same thing. You start, I don't have a video of it here, but essentially what you do is you go into your display, you say you want to start the calibration of it, and it will say, what's your actual loss? And then you have to put in your bushel per acre grain loss or your percentage grain loss. And then what the combine is doing, you still have to tell them when you drop the pan, but then when you put that result in, the combine goes automatically, okay, button was pushed here, the pan dropped, here's the result from the pan, here's what I saw on the sensor, now what's the target? So now the combine is asking you, what's your loss target? So the display says, where do you want to run this machine at? Because you just measured 3 bushel. What do you want to do? Do you want to give her heck and throw out 5 and get it done before the rain? Or do you want to throw out half a bushel and make me do different settings? That's how smart that software is going to be here. And that is every new S700 and every new X9 2025 coming to the market here that will have that in it. It's the next step of automation that still requires the physical way of measuring. Here's a video from John Deere in Australia and New Zealand from last year, where they did their X9 and their S-Series testing. And this is a quote directly from one of the X9 engineers. He says, we don't set a combine without a smart pen system from Bushel Plus. I told you the Harvest Academy is not a sales pitch, but when it comes to the automation, those are things I like to share, because if the experts and the people that are building the combines are using the tools and are doing it, and that's the way they set a combine, that's also how they want us to set a combine in the field, okay? So that is something that's coming. You probably see more of that if you get a demo this year, or if you had a demo. Some farmers may have seen this with John Deere. They have ran some demos in the field with it last summer. But it's a new iteration, which makes it practical, tries to help the farmer realize what the machine is doing, and then the automation is getting smarter, because now it can think, oh, farmer actually wants half a bushel grain loss, we measure 2. Now I have a factor inside the display, and I'm trying to leverage and get closer with the grain loss to that factor. If you don't have automation, it's the same process as I described earlier. You don't need that feature tomorrow. Trust me, I'm not saying this to sell this feature. I'm just talking about this because some of the software updates and all that stuff that's coming in the future is interesting to talk about, and also shows that the industry doesn't stand still, because we've been talking about drop pens for a long time. A couple other things here about grain loss assessment, the theory versus real life. It'd be awesome to check our grain loss and catch every kernel with a second combine behind it, like Pammy is doing it, or the research engineers that we work with are doing it. It'd be awesome. We would have every kernel. But it's not practical, right? It takes a long time. Or here, like my buddy in Germany, looks on the ground. Well, it's not really accurate either. So we have to find something that's practical for real life, okay? And I talked about this a bit earlier. Please stay safe out there. If you throw a pan underneath, be careful. Those machines are not getting any lighter. Machines are not getting any smaller, and they're getting only faster. Be careful when you are checking for grain loss. We do have a customer in Washington, Idaho area that had a plastic pan on a stick, and they would run beside a combine and kind of swipe through the chaff to catch a sample and then turn around and run away. And one day the hired man tripped, and that stick landed right in his eye. And thankfully, he was wearing safety glasses, and they only, quotation marks, only lost an eye. But the boss said if he would have not worn the safety glasses, it would have been a lot worse. And that person came to our booth and just bought it without asking a question. So we asked him. So he told us that story, and he says, safety is so important on my farm, just for liability, but also for myself and my family. We all want to come back home safe to our family. Farming is dangerous enough as it is. Let's not make harvest more dangerous with this kind of things. As I said, I always like to bring a little bit of humor in it too. So I want to pay a little bit of a tribute here to our buddy Quick Dick in Saskatchewan. You may have seen this before, but I always get a kick out of it. The way he describes it, he describes really well how the calibration works. And what he does really well, he describes the impact on the farm. The impact on the farmer and kind of the emotions around harvest optimization and how it works. You guys going to check the audio?
Hey, Dick, I see you guys got the combines rolling, eh?
Yep.
Just got going, hammer down, man. Nice. Got to get it all in the bin. Inputs were super expensive this year. What do you got for loss on those combines?
Oh, like nothing. You just hit auto and they set themselves.
Really? Like, how do you check them?
Well, gosh, it's good.
Are you serious? That's like checking the oil with the hood closed. It's like checking your cows for foot rot while you drive by them at 80 kilometers an hour on the road. Don't you have a drop pan?
I don't have time for that. We're harvesting, man.
Dick, it literally takes 5 minutes.
Geez, that was pretty quick. I can't afford one of those setups, and we can't stop. We're harvesting.
Okay, so we just determined you're overthrowing 4 bushels an acre running on your factory settings at 14 acres an hour. That's 56 bushels an hour loss times 2 machines is 112 bushels an hour loss. Did you contract any of this wheat?
Yeah, got a bunch locked in at like $11.
Okay, so $11 a bushel times 112 bushels. You're throwing $1,232 an hour out of the back of your combines, and you're telling me you can't afford to stop?
Everybody stop the combines. We're going to take some time and dial these things in.
I figured as much.
This is Quick Dick McDick signing off, reminding you, minimizing loss is an absolute must. Start by knowing what you're throwing with Bushel Plus.
There you go, good old Saskatchewan boy. And, I talked to him a few years ago, and he's funny, right? And we were talking to him about stuff on the farm and combines, and he says, Marcel, I just don't want to do a commercial for drop pens. That's not me. That's not my content. I said, hey, I wasn't asking for this, but I'm just curious how you guys do it on the farm. He goes, well, you know what? I'm actually a cattle farmer. I don't know much about combines. Like, I love cattle. We're doing the combining as well, but we got to learn some stuff about it. So he actually did a part of a Harvest Academy with us, and we showed him how to cal concaves and all those things. And he was just blown away of how this combine could work and what kind of grain they could save. And, then all of a sudden he sends me a video like this after, and he said, you know what, I was so happy about everything I learned, I did this video here because it's kind of cool and I like what I learned. So a really good supporter there. I've talked about this lots. I think I see some faces in here that actually have our systems. It is quick and easy, it is simple. If it's not quick and easy, nobody wants to do it. We have the systems here to do a quick demo afterwards and a bit of a walk around. Essentially, you attach a drop pen or the smart pen to the combine, and you remotely drop it either with a remote or with a cell phone. You drop it off the combine. There's an air separator with it that cleans the sample in about 40 seconds. You have a sample clean. If you have lots of straw from dropping in the windrow, you may have to do this a couple of times. Put it on the scale, run it through our app, and it shows you in a couple of minutes how many bushel per acre or how many dollars per hour you might be losing. And then we want you to turn this into value and obviously having less loss. The reason why the system looks the way it is, the silver carrier, is kind of the protective measure for the red pan that sits inside. So as it's riding underneath the combine, now the drop pan, the red piece, is actually protected, and no kernels or chaff can actually fall in the pan before it drops off the machine. There's only one design out there like this, and it's kind of good to point it out because oftentimes it doesn't. Sometimes you don't see it right away. So I'd like to point that out. And here's a couple examples out of the field, which we can probably keep going with all night with examples. But this is a real example of somebody that has multiple combines in the field. This was in a large field with multiple John Deere combines, and it wasn't a John Deere. I'm just going to say this up front, because every other machine was doing well. And this machine was running the same settings as anybody else. So in the cab, it looked exactly the same. Same speed, was fine. Sample was a bit odd. And then we checked every machine. And when I say we, our team was out there. I can't take the credit for it. Our team was down in Oklahoma for this. And they're throwing 10.7 bushel per acre out the back of the machine. And the reason for this is that the machine was out of calibration. And when I say out of calibration, it's when you're sitting in the cab. It's not a sneak peek from a different module here, but now I'm getting carried away, so let's do it. So when you're sitting in the cab and the display shows you your concave opening is on 5, but the actual opening on the concave is maybe on 18 because it's not called properly to each other, or your concaves are not leveled properly. You can change anything you want in that display. It won't get better. And when you call us for support, the first question we're asking is, have you calibrated your concaves? Have you calibrated your sieves? And it's the same with the sieves. When you're sitting in the cab and your sieve shows 5, that sieve is better be 5 or at least correlated to that factor number. Because if the sieve is all the way closed at 5, you can put it at 3, at 8, it won't make it any better. So that was the only reason why the machine was throwing over. And it was a new operator in it that unfortunately wasn't told. Nobody checked the calibrations. And all of a sudden you go from 0.8 bushel and you started with 10.7 bushel per acre grain loss. And the yields down there are not that high either. It was like a 55 bushel crop. So at some point somebody should see that in the yield monitor. But again, don't take this as an offense, okay? I get asked a lot which combine is the best. Or we get asked. I say I all the time, but it's really we as Bushel Plus. It's a good team, so it's us. We get asked about what's the best combine out there. The biggest problem is usually here. It's between the steering wheel and the driver's seat. That's usually where your biggest problem is in the combine, okay? Don't get offended, but that's usually where the trouble is. Because it's not always the color of the combine, it's not always this. If somebody wants to ask, hey, what's the best combine? I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to say, what crops are you harvesting? What kind of conditions? Dry, wet, tough? What's the yield? Are you mechanically inclined? And who is your closest dealer? Those are the 4 questions to determine what kind of combine you should buy without listening to somebody just saying, here's a color. Another example of canola, and that's a true example out of Manitoba. where the customer actually texted us these pictures and said, hey, we started measuring in this one spot. We brought it down from 6.5 bushel grain loss in canola to 1.2 bushel grain loss per acre. And now we had a couple of rains, and this is how the field looks. And you can see the distinct lines in the field, and we can see the difference in the fields. So it comes back to the ROI of investing into a system, but also investing into the time and having the patience to do that at harvest and learning about it, how to make that better. We talked about the impact already. You know, it's a profit loss management. You can do that all with that Smart Drop app that comes with that whole setup. We talked about dropping straw in the windrow or spreading it or having chaff spreaders. Don't be afraid of the math. The app does it all for you. Somebody gave us a testimonial that said, if you can make a phone call with an iPhone, you can work this app. It's asking you a few questions with an icon, what combine you have, how big the header is, how your straw pattern is, how your chaff pattern is. You plug in a couple numbers from the scale, and it spits out the result. And I'm going to go a step further. Once you have done this a few times, you may not even need the scale anymore. You're going to be so good at this that you're going to look into that air separator. After a while, you're going to look into it and you go, that's good enough. That's the only time we can say that's good enough, when it's in the air separator after the drop pen, okay? Not when it's on the ground. A couple other cool things that people have been doing over the last few years. They're actually adding 2 systems to the combine now because they see how important it is to measure. So now they can drop one pan with each remote separate. They can drop one in the middle, one on the side. Or if you have one system from us already, you can always marry a couple together and you have a master switch, and now you drop both at the same time. And now you're measuring nicely your grain loss in the back of the machine, in the middle, and then also on the side. I'm looking a little bit at the time here as well. I want to draw a couple of conclusions to bring this back to kind of where we started, okay? The conclusion of this whole thing, the takeaways I want you to go away with, which I do appreciate it that it's only an hour and a half. So I had to condense a lot of things into an hour and a half. So I really hope there was a few things in there that you can take away, and hopefully you're interested in more in a longer Harvest Academy. But take this away, okay? Treating harvest as a precision farming activity. Versus all too often we think we gotta go, sun is shining, let's just give her. And sometimes we forget about things that could be very important. And looking at the ROI of harvest time versus future time spent on the outcome. I understand that harvest is stressful and we want to get it done. But look at the ROI of the time in the future spent. And what I mean by this is extra tillage, potential extra spraying, potential running the sprayer over it, losing nutrients in volunteer crops that robbing water and nutrients of the next crop. There is a lot of things that are coming on top of the actual 1, 2, 3 bushel grain loss that was saved at harvest. So really, it's one of those things to think about, and it's really an investment into the efficiency of the entire farm operation because it will help in so many different things. And I talked about this already. It's the peace of mind in the cap. How many people do we have coming to us at trade shows and telling us, you know what, I quantify now what's going on, and I'm not second guessing myself anymore. It's the peace of mind. And then all along, and I want to make that very clear, we're here to help and work with you, okay? We're the harvest optimization company. We have the products, we have the knowledge, and we also learn something every time. We'll never come to your farm and say, this is how you have to do it. The first thing we'll do is asking questions to really understand your situation, your crops, your combine, because it is specific and different. And if you ever get the pitch of, you know, one thing can do it all, or one concave can do it all, you got to think about this, and you're going to start asking a lot of questions when you get that pitch. Because when you compare this to a seed cleaner, for example, okay? I'm not saying it doesn't work all the time. There's some areas where one crop concave may work, But if you think about a seed cleaner business, do you think they clean every different seed with the same shaking mechanism, with the same sieves, and with the same openings? Somebody else made a good example. They said, have you mowed your lawn yet with a bush hog or a big mulcher? You know, there's kind of things to this. They can be very detailed, specifically in Western Canada. We're growing some of the best crops in the world. We have some of the most innovative farmers here. We have great people, great crops. Let's get them in the bin. And we're here to help you with that. We're here for some walkarounds on the combine, on the products. Happy to take any questions if you want to ask them in a smaller circle. That's not a problem at all. We're going to stick around for you here. Again, we're headquartered in Brandon, Manitoba, and I thank everyone to come out to our talk here today about it. And again, I also appreciate that you see a condensed version of what we're doing. And if you ever want to contact us, go to our website, bushelplus.com. You should definitely follow us on social media at Bushel Plus. Don't matter if you're on the TikToks or on Instagram, wherever you may be. Follow us at Bushel Plus to get all the fun updates. We also have an email distribution list. So if you want to be on a list to get a notification when the Harvest Academy training, like a full day training, is in your area, you can get on the list and we'll send out an invitation, or I should say, besides invitation, I should say an information about where the next training session is. We have about 3 booked in Alberta right now. We have a maybe in Saskatchewan, and we have a couple in Manitoba. And that's here to stay. We have more people being trained up for it to deliver this. And then we have a pile of other real-life examples, you know, that we're happy to share. And I'm just going to let that run in the background here. With that, I want to say thank you very much for everyone sitting through an hour and a half here with me. Again, very much appreciate your time and hope you have a great seeding season and an even better harvest. Thank you. Appreciate it.